All right. Thanks everyone for coming back for the next session. I have the pleasure of introducing. We were debating, or not debating, but I was being informed about how to pronounce and the etymology of Ruzica's name.
Okay, let's hear.
Yeah, I think it was Ruzica Piskac.
Piskac.
Piskac, which apparently this whole it means. You have to remind me. It's rosy. Whistle. So if you ever need the etymology, I now know that this general prefix of Rus, in many languages corresponds with some form of rose. So fun fact. More directly related to the Simons Institute, where just because one of the experts, as far as I can tell, on reasoning with software and formal methods and AI. And I think this is going to be a particularly interesting intersection with legal reasoning. And when I saw the title of the talk in the program, I was very excited because this is one of my pet issues of, no one really knows what any of the legal documents mean. And so it's good that we'll have formal methods taking over it.
Exactly.
So.
That's the plan. Let's kind of use formal methods to overtake the world in legal reasoning. But
right. Well, with that, please.
Thank you for a very nice introduction. And right, thanks also to organizers for inviting me. And when they invited me, they say can you talk about synthesis? And those, actually I did lots of work in synthesis, but then when I came here, I thought maybe it would be also nice to see some applications. So, I will rather talk about this new work that I've been pursuing in the past year or two on legal reasoning. And we actually got inspired by Gottfried Leibniz. So I don't know how many of you know him, because he's one of the very famous polymaths, right? I've seen some people smiling, so that means that's probably Tim Newton. But anyway, so this is I'm Tim Leibniz. So he was philosopher, historian. He was also a lawyer, and he was mathematician. And in some sense, you will see on the next slide, he could be also considered a father of AI. And he was actually advertising even back in his time in 1600 for using logic in law. And practically his work, I mean, it sounds like a new thing, but it's actually, he was going towards automation of legal reasoning. And I want to show you what he actually wrote. So his goal was to resolve legal disputes with precision and clarity with which accountants settle financial discrepancies. You will say he didn't say that. Actually, this is translated from his German writing. He says to take pen in hand, sit down at the abacus and have it called in a friend if they want, let's say to each other, let's calculate. So that was his vision. If you have a legal problem, let's calculate. So you can see, why I am Tim Leibniz and not Tim Newton on the who invented calculus. But now kind of more seriously, I also want to tell you why did we start to work in this area? And the reason was actually not kind of to make some historical joke. The reasons were actually quite practical. And, there was this relatively recent survey to see how Americans are actually impacted by legal problems and legal fees. And as you could imagine, maybe I can immediately show you one of the things, probably those who needs the legal help more are actually coming from the low-income households. And they said that in the last year, they experienced at least one legal problem. And very often happens, I was discussing with some people, that they not only that they experience legal problem, but very often they don't even know that they have a legal problem. And once when you need to get lawyers involved, probably, although that they are costly. So then they say, they almost all of them report these court debts will affect their daily life. They say parents had to cut back on at least one essential daily need. And, so you can see, it's really overall bad for the low-income households. I mean, and from what I've learned by talking with various legal experts, it's even worse than what you would think. In the best case, like when you realize that you need legal help, if you would go to some, let's say, pro bono clinic where they would try to help you. But again, you would assume who is working in these pro bono clinics, like, like setup. It's mostly students who actually maybe are overseen by someone who has some legal experience, but also students who kind of know how to answer, let's say, if A and B and, like basic 5 questions, but if there is something unusual, then again, you're practically, on your own. And, like getting bad legal advice, that's another issue. I'm not saying that I'm trying to solve all the problems. I'm just kind of currently, like I'm going towards this to kind of show you things are bad. But also you will say, okay, low income needs, there is some just summary. And one thing that really kind of almost like kicked me was when I was reading this report. It was on PBS, like public television, so there's still people who are watching, that's me. And it turns out that there is okay, maybe the number is a bit large, that they say almost 80 billion a year, there is number of the unclaimed government benefits. And if you ask why the people don't claim, because they don't understand the rules. And very often those rules are exactly written in the way that people cannot apply, like they're kind of cyclic, referring to all the things. So, like if you're just someone who tries to understand what are you entitled, then most likely you won't be able to do that. And but okay, so we understand that there is need there, but also when it comes to companies, that is, they are also apparently US companies are spending more than their global counterparts, like almost 3 times more, because again, there is so many rules and regulations. And then, like if you think like you don't have enough rules and regulations, what you will do, add more rules and your regulations to regulate those rules and regulations. So things are really quite bad. And today in the area of AI, like you can imagine that everyone is like, oh, if everything is so complicated, there are tools that can give you a simple answer, right? So you guys just give things to AI and they will answer you. And I don't, like want to trash, but there is apparently really lots of AI-based startups. I mean, I'm not saying that all of them are like this because that would be very wrong, but like that there are lots of startups who actually try to use this AI, like whether we want to call it a boom or a approaching winter, but they want to use that. And it's kind of funny. It's like there is so many. There was actually even the value this legal tech in 22. This was before AI became such a big deal. Already back then was valued around $28 billion. And now they say this is actually one of the fastest growing markets, that they believe that soon will reach like 50 billion. I cannot even imagine how big these numbers are, but like practically I just try to tell you like, yes, there is a very much need for that. And I also don't want to say not the things that actually have happened just recently, right? Like, so there is a long history. I mean, we started with Leibniz, but then let's kind of come from the fact that, like today you have there are tools where actually you could do this AI legal reasoning, like, I don't dare to say AI. I mean, but even though there were AI rules, like back then, like in the 70s, there was a system for a tax. Then there was a more sophisticated case-based system called HIPPO. So this is one Shyster was, I think this was a PhD thesis in Australia, also developed for this. Then, I mean, probably the first time when you manage to hear bad words about using AI in legal reasoning is when judges try to bring decisions. So that was rule based on this tool called Compass. And that was, like heavily discriminating. So, like over, like certain populations. So that's kind of was also, like practically lots of those things kind of give bad names. But nevertheless, then a real good people came to the play. So you can see going with Catala. So this is a part maybe of you, some of you have heard about workshop series called ProLala, stands for Programming Languages and Law. It was always associated with POPL. And then you had this one, that's one of the languages. This is developed by French teams because it's for legal reasoning. And I mean, again, going back that you have suddenly such a large legal tech AI market. I just mentioned Hill Co-Counsel. Some of you have heard already about Harvey AI. Maybe those who, I know that some people told me we have some legal expertise. You have probably seen Westlaw and LexisNexis. So all those things are actually kind of going now into that direction. So, but what I will try to tell you today is like, but we in formal methods have actually tools that can sit so beautifully in this reasoning. Like, I mean, even I know that when you talk to lawyers, very often they will refer to rules and regulations as legal code. So it's kind of, like there is a word code, and like if something that we know is how to deal with the code, right? And when I started to work on this problem like 2 years ago, I remember I was telling this project to Bettina, and she kind of went like, oh, like that will never work, because actually she was quite right, because what we were proposing at that time, like, oh, we will develop this tool and it will work for everything and so on and so on. And of course, like people have ideas, but then what we kind of realize is like, for their different sorts of legal problems or legal reasoning. And we believe that for each of them, you actually have a different techniques. And then you will probably, I didn't even say why I am qualified to talk about this. Actually, I'm not, but I'm working with people from a Yale Law School, namely with Professor Scott Shapiro, who is a person who is actually qualified. So practically each of us is bringing something to the table. So that's why, like, for now, trust me through the proxy that I really know what I'm working on and talking about. So when it comes to legal reasoning, let me put my legal hat. It actually, there are like two directions, right? Like one of them is like the things that you usually see in the movies. That's kind of how I learned about laws, right? You have cases, and cases will be the following, right? Like, okay, the rule says X, but in the A versus B, this was overturned, and then it was overturned again, and so on. So this is quite case-based reasoning. And then you have rules-based reasoning, like when you do your taxes, it never says like my taxes I need to pay, but then in the A versus B, this was overturned. No, because they're quite heavily regulated. We are in California when it comes to CO2 emissions from your car, also heavily regulated. I will show you some other example. Like there are also areas which are heavily regulated. And what I'm saying, like when it comes to the reasoning in both directions, we want to use different techniques. When it comes to the rule-based reasoning, I think this is actually where we want to pull out all our hammers, because those are good nails to hit. We have like automated reasoning would fit very nicely here. And when it comes to case-based reasoning, then actually, if you think about, like you say, there are a bunch of examples, and we want to kind of synthesize something from a bunch of examples. This is actually something that really goes nicely in the area of LLMs. Now, of course, that brings us like, can you trust them? But that's a different issue. I will address all that. So what I'm showing you here is like to kind of make my point. This is actually when you don't have any notions about how like how legal code looks like, because it's like incredibly boring, and it is mostly just definition. You can see, like, I don't know, for purpose of paragraph 1, the term ceiling amount means with respect. Now again, like the section should not be applied, so which means this is that what does it apply to? Does not apply, like text treated as imposed by section 1. So it is mostly, when it comes to legal text, it's two things, like either you define something or you enumerate something. It's not like, like Anna Karenina or anything, like something beautifully and complicated written. It's very much like here are definitions. So suddenly you start to realize like, oh yeah, I can see this is actually not really, it is really could be described as a code. And on another example that they have here, it's like I already mentioned, like gas exhaust emissions. This is actually one of the topics that I had the students. So this is usually we have students who play with those things. They take a piece of code, then translate them, and they kind of tell, like what did they found. And funny enough, one thing that she found, like, like it's just kind of regulations. And she realized she's, like what you would think like big picture. You take this, convert to solver, and then you ask solver like, I have this car, can I still register? And then it turns out that one of parameters, I actually didn't even check with this, but like one of parameters is like your altitude, where are you? And it kind of says like, oh, if you manage to bring your car to the station that is under the sea level, you will pass, because one of the parameters is, you know, like, so things like this you learn. And that is actually really interesting. That's one of my favorite ones. It's like Dijon mustard. Is anyone here from France? You would assume that Dijon mustard goes something only that is from Dijon. Ha ha, little do you know. So you can kind of, at least, let's say you learn something. This is rules and clarification about Dijon mustards. Like honey mustard must have such a yellow tan color, and I think that, but that doesn't mean anything. Then you actually get like really description, like in the acidity, salt amount, total solids, whatever that means. So you know, like you can really see to which type your Dijon mustard falls into. It's in addition that it has to be from Dijon. So this is now, because you trust me that this really heavily regulated text where nothing will be overturned or will be stand. But naturally, there are also the cases, right? And from what I've heard, that used to be previously, all these cases had to be printed. So, you know, like law school libraries were really like something that contained those like grimoire, like books where were all the cases in. And again, if you would look into the cases, you would, it's again, nothing that what you have seen in the movies. It's really, again, very horribly written. It's like, you know, like who is there in the case? What was it? What has happened? When it happened? And it more or less looks the following, like the Fiore chief judge. It was a petitioner were like non-human rights project, which actually tried to get out an elephant out of the Bronx Zoo. And then you actually see, you've kind of, this is actually when it comes, what in the movies, you just see like approved, denied, or overturned. It kind of really looks like this. This was like habemus corpus, see this matter, see like, you know, like right project versus slavery, this one number, see this one number, see, you know, like, so it is really just like lots of, you know, like referring to the previous cases. So it's kind of maybe kind of looks like, you know, like disappointing, but that's legal reasoning for you. So then we kind of realize, okay, maybe we don't want to have one tool that will rule them all, but we actually have to have two different rules, right? If initially we were talking about chatbots, and then we kind of realized, okay, you don't also want about chatbots because that will be illegal practice of the law. So we actually want to have tools that people can use. And then we kind of said, like, we will need to have these law bots, so to say. There will have to be two directions, clearly. One will go for those which are like using densely specified laws, like I showed you, like environmental regulations, tax provisions, Dijon mustard, governmental benefits regulations. And for this, we actually want to use combinations of LLMs and automated reasoning. But now also let me kind of go back to another place, which is pretty much like happy. The elephant wants to go, people want to put him somewhere else. So, you know, in that case, you actually really need to provide, it's not like, you know, like, what is the output for all elephants, but you actually really goes like with the factual scenarios, like here is the things, like, can you create me a memo? So there is like these memos are, you can consider them as internal tools that actually don't go out, which are kind of specific to the company, where they really create what would be the outcome, right? Because also there are other things that you learn from the movies, you know, like you have all this, and then suddenly someone says like, aha, I revelation. It's not really like this. Jury actually just needs to be there to decide whether what can actually follows from all the presented cases. There is no like nothing major. No, if you would break down and cry or something, probably judge will call you and kind of stop the, you know, like, so there is no all these things that we've seen, but you know, like we will then watch the movies. Anyway, so I'm saying this to kind of go to the case-based reasoning. You actually will need to kind of, you will need to use LLMs again to, it will be more inductive and certain search, because you know, like you have probably seen example of the people who just try to use ChatGPT and then they kind of are really embarrassed in front of the world. So I want to go now in those two directions. I will present you two tools. Alfred sounds like a very concierge-like name, right? Like it's your, you know, like someone who will, your wish is my command. And that will be our tool that actually could help you better understand complex legal regulations. And maybe I will just tell you, even though I already output what we want to do. So you will take, you know, like laws, regulations, and policies in English, or it can be any other natural language. You will use LLMs or some other techniques to translate this into first order logic. Then we will extract decision tree that will actually help us to explain why something holds or doesn't hold. And to kind of show you what is this, maybe I will tell you also our first customer, let's say, so to say, customer. So we were, you know, like giving this talk about university, what we want to do. And then human resources told us like, well, look, you know, like what we got all the time is like, we want to hire fellows. Fellows is like, you know, like someone like, let's say, postdoc. But it really depends what you are. Maybe you will be postdoctoral fellow, postdoctoral associate, research associate, research this, you know, like, so there is like 20 or 30 different classes. And then you, because, you know, like you have faculty handbook, which has around, I don't know, 400 or 800 pages, you never check what does it say, but all you do is like, hey, you know, send a person to who I need to hire this person. What should I do? And then they kind of, you know, like they want to just kind of tell you something nasty, but they don't, they go and check everything for you. So then Karen told us, like, her name is really Karen, you know, like if you would be able to somehow prevent people that constantly spam me with this all the time, the same question, could you actually get something that would be, you know, like that people would immediately know how to do it? It's like, well, did you try something? She's like, oh yeah, we kind of created this 46 questions that you need to answer. And then, you know, like you would immediately know what to answer. But again, let's be honest, who would you would go and answer 46 questions to kind of decide whether someone is postdoctoral associate or postdoctoral research associate? And you will say, is it relevant? Yeah, it is, because, you know, each of them has different benefits and it's really complicated. So then we kind of decided, okay, we will then translate this. And you see, this is kind of like, if you can almost read this, like if your appointment type is associate research scholar, then, that means you have to have degree of doctorate, your funding source has to come from a GA, whatever it is, or it has to be from funding from Yale, and you need to work on the Yale research, right? And additionally, you have to have extensive experience. And now, that means that now we were able to extract this tree that I told you, and we were able to construct something like here. And you would see that what was really nice, you were able in the 2 questions or so on. Okay, there's a question.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, so if you go back to the previous, like, I feel like a lot of times the answers to, like, the problem comes when the answers to these questions are fuzzy, right? Because often, like, what's the definition? I mean, some of these things might be very clear, but like a doctorate, you know, like, oh, what if it's an international doctorate or this or that? And then, like,
oh, don't worry. That's why, you know, like they have, why do you think they filled 800 pages?
I see. So you can actually get it down.
No. We did find things where things are ambiguous. And I will come to that. For example, maybe, okay, since you already asked, like, one of the questions that when we realized that things are ambiguous was like when we kind of played with something, and she wanted to have this also for reimbursement. And one was like, if you have alcohol during the dinner, is this reimbursable or not? And then you realize it doesn't say anything. There are rules, you know, like, so practically if you don't, because how the tool is working is like it tries to construct the answer, one of them. But if not, then you can say, is the rule is alcohol is reimbursable? Then you will just say both. You will get yes and no. You know, like, so I'm sorry that tool is not working on this laptop, but if you want, I can schedule. I can do you this Zoom. I can give you or show you how it works, because then you will get like both will be answers, yes and no, and then you can kind of say if yes. When you see like such contradictory answer, then you see that this is because of there is ambiguity. It's not defined. So it's kind of, in majority of the cases that we encounter, especially when it comes to employment, the only thing that we encountered was not defined. If you're, no, I forgot, let me make up story. If you're associate research scholar fellow, then it's not defined if you or you don't have not health insurance, a dental insurance. Because, you know, like someone, and how we found out that, because, you know, like it was like you kind of ask the questions, right? So it kind of guides you. So like, yes, it's possible that you, through all the answer, it's possible that you do have dental insurance, but also that you don't have dental insurance. And then you look why, because it's not defined.
I guess just to make sure I understand, so like in the alcohol example, my concern, like, what if you, like, there are corner cases where maybe you have like zero proof, and like, do those count as, do those count as alcohol or not, right? And
no,
those kinds of questions are like, you're saying that all of those things are specified precisely?
No, I'm not saying that they're all specified, but if they're not specified, we will not tell you A, like, unless you have explanation for A or B, we will tell you both A and B are possible.
I see. Got it.
So,
Thanks.
and then you actually, if both A and B are possible, then actually you need to either strengthen your rules or just say, okay. And because that's also, it's relevant because it kind of also reflects some sorts of like unwritten rules, right? Because, like you have rules and then you have rules which says like, okay, it's not there, but this is what we follow. So then actually you can infer those unwritten rules by maybe doing some sorts of that. What we offered to do next was like combining some sorts of logging and then see how do they decide. But, like unless, like if you cannot find explanations for alcohol or not alcohol, you just kind of say both are possible.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. That makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
So a related but slightly different question. What's your experience been with using, this looks like first order logic with perhaps some algebraic data types or some standard background theories. So what has been your experience with using those kinds of logics? Do you feel like it's good enough, or do you need like non-monotonic logics, or the quantitative semantics, probabilistic logic, all of that stuff?
That is a good question. So we were that's what we probably thought that we will need initially. We thought like, okay, you have this oughta, might, and so on. So we were really thinking we will need to develop some sorts of, like new deontic reasoner. But it turns out, because the questions that we are currently focused on, which is like compliance, explainability, exploitations, and safeguarding, for them first order logic was enough. And but like to go in the future directions, we might need to extend. And also it's a very cheap first order logic. It is the first order logic which just I needed booleans. So as you can see, there is only booleans. You occasionally need a very little, like when it comes to, like numbers, and then you need very rarely uninterpreted functions. But it's in general, it's quite cheap. Yeah.
It looks like algebraic data types and maybe enum types or something like that.
Yeah. It is quite, But so like, so that's like, and what was nice, then you kind of, since you go through this provide explanation, you also want to provide the shortest explanation, which means that you don't need to answer 43 questions, but like you kind of construct these decision trees which will kind of give you the fastest possible answer. So for example, like funding source was the most discriminating answer that you start with. So you will say, what is the funding source? Is it from Yale? What is the self-research? What is the work type? I want to do self-research. Well, then employment is not possible, right? So it's immediately there. And you will see, then we will even explain why. But also here, when I define like to green one, like which is postgraduate associate, which is like, I'm from Yale and I will do Yale research and I have bachelor degree, then this will be postgraduate associate. And so kind of how the tool looks like, you kind of put in all these university HR policies, equal opportunity, immigration guidance, blah, 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 blah. You put them there, and then they actually parse all these rules. To be honest, we just kind of parse for them just the parts which was actually working on employment, because this is all they wanted to hear. And we didn't go through all 800 pages because this part was actually enough. And then when it comes, you will kind of get the questions here like, will this fellowship be paid or unpaid? It will be from which funds, from grants, blah, blah. and then again something, and then you say like, okay, you want to get postdoctoral associate, and this link will click and guide you towards postgraduate associate. I really don't know if people started to use this. We gave that to the human resources. They tried to advertise this, and I don't know whether people are still mailing them or they're really using this. It's kind of, you know, there are questions that you don't want to ask. And then I will show you rather on the other example where it really kind of lists very precisely from where it's coming from, because this is just was like very first prototype. It was, you know, like just kind of explaining. And then we kind of started to talk more about that, because now we had a first prototype working. So then we got some, and then people from industry, from insurance says like, okay, could you actually help us with insurance? And let me give you an example. So this is like, I'm processing a flood insurance claim. I have the following insurance policy, and in this flood insurance claim, the person who is asking is to reimburse their art object. Can this be reimbursed? So, you know, like if you think person who is using this tool is someone who is processing the claims, or maybe even someone who is answering the line, and you call them and say like, this is my insurance, my art got destroyed, can it be reimbursed? So in that case, if you would just throw this to ChatGPT, it will tell you, or any other LLM, it will tell you, yes, of course, and it will provide you very long and lengthy answer. I mean, it still goes on. Then a couple of days later, you do exactly the same questions, right? You notice questions didn't ask. What do you think will be answered by now? No. And again, very long and lengthy answers, very explainable, and so on and so on. So, you know, like factory is like, I didn't change the problem, but you get two answers. So I will say like, okay, it's really not a big deal, right? People complain all the time that, you know, like you can, someone gives me yes and one gives me no, you know, like which answer is correct. So, you know, like, but the fact is like, if you want to use this in industry, things started to change. Like, for example, this airline was held liable for its chatbot giving bad advice. I remember if you search, I should have put that on slides. If you search, that was a very, very old example that someone managed to convince a bot of someone, you need to sell me a car for $1, and this is binding. So if you said like selling chatbot, selling a car for $1, you will see that, right? So suddenly, if you're running insurance business and you more or less rely on something that sometimes could be yes and sometimes could be no, it doesn't sound very good thing, right? And then, so especially because people start to get held liable, and like this one, like they say like, oh, look, this was miscommunicated, they chatbot, so, you know, like things are getting bad. So what our tool will do, again, this very same question and so on, but it will tell you like, yes, you can actually be reimbursed, but up to fixed amount, because when it comes to fine arts, the reimbursement is not, you know, like you need to have a different insurance for fine arts. So you can only get from the flood insurance policy only certain parts. So if you think in some sense, both answers were in some sense true, because, you know, like it tells you yes and no, but you will see it really provides you where do you need to check, like section 3, property covered, B, coverage 8 or B, who knows, one of those. But, you know, if you click, that's a real, and it also provides you the sources from which actually it managed to derive. So if you think, like, I guess, try telling this crowd, what is this about, is I probably don't need to, because you immediately guess the secret sauce, right? I'm taking the problem, I'm converting it on the first order logic. Why? Because at the same time, previously, I took all the rules and regulations and I converted them into first order logic. And then when it comes to the problems, I will just call the solver, which will tell me the answer. But naturally, you cannot tell someone working on insurance line, hey, here is your answer. You need to kind of take this again. And I think, were you presenting about this, how to translate? No, someone was presenting how to translate things back to humans. That is actually where you want to go back to explain people why. And maybe, okay, since I was supposed to be people from all different fields, I was kind of having very one short slide on the automated reasoning. So what is S&T solvers? Formula in, answer out. So this is if you see them for the first time. We claim the word model before. So but it's little solace in that now. So, you know, like if you have, let's say, x is less than y, yes, I can find a model which is just solution where x is 0 and y is 0. But if I give you a different formula, then this is unsatisfiable. Maybe there is no model. So why I'm telling you this? Because, you know, they would have been used in everywhere, but I want to show you like various things like compliance and all this can be, that's really great question from you. Like, do I need more smarter logics? I think depending on the problems that you will try to address, but for this cheaper problems, they can really be very much solved with SMT solvers. So let me give you again an example. So I told you we started to work with the insurance industry. So how many of you knows like section 125 of flexible spending account? Anyone? Okay, so no. Okay, see, that is bad part. Why do I even know such stuff? But I know now. So anyway, when it comes to the insurances, right? This is some sorts of flexible spending account is something that you kind of put your money that you can use for various things, and then it's not taxed. So let's say when you go and Section 125 mostly talks about health insurances and the similar things health related. And in order for you to claim this pre-tax benefits, there is one requirement. It cannot be discriminatory. So for example, look at this one. My company is offering a deduction for glasses, but only if the glasses cost over $2,000. Does this still fall under Section 125 plan deductions? So you would say, yeah, probably if I get some, like offering, if I get in, that would be a good idea. But it's not, because if you kind of say, I will only reimburse those which actually can pay glasses that cost over $2,000, that actually means you're discriminating against rich people, which are not, you don't say rich people, but you call them highly compensated individuals. And since it's discriminatory, then you cannot apply. No, seriously, that's the legal term. Then you actually cannot apply this. And now I can also can tell you a funny part from what has happened. So I was giving this talk at TPFL, which is in Switzerland. And I say, like, if glasses cost over $2,000, and no one even eye blinks. And I'm like, okay, wrong audience, obviously. But anyway, so, like, if you think what you will do that, like you take all these things, convert them into first order logic formula, and this is just implication, right? You call implication, you tell solver and tells you yes or no. But then again, you don't want to really just say, yes, you can reimburse or not, because one thing that you want to have here is explanation. And then explanation, we kind of tell you again the same story, but then what we do have in that case will be minimal unsatisfiable core. So which means that out of all rules that are out there, you will just select those which are relevant. And then out of these relevant rules, you see this is kind of these labels named and stuff that you, if you play with minimal satisfiable cores, then you actually have to create the text and say like, okay, now I realize out of all these rules, which are them, pull them out, and then we call we actually, there are two things, like there we want to provide legalese, where it actually says like section 13.98 says the following. And then actually there is also another LLM on the top, which kind of takes this and creates this into something readable. And another thing that we can do very easily was exploitations. And then what is exploitation? Well, exploitation is what you want to do. So imagine you're at faculty and you want to have one more sabbatical, and then you will put like, is it possible to get more than one semester of sabbatical? You take Yale faculty textbook, ask if it's possible. I'm here, so you know the answer. It's not. And when it comes to safeguarding, this is actually what inspired us with all the work that is done on the shields. And what we did is like, like shields, this safeguarding is kind of say like, we can use formal methods in combination with within AI systems to prevent harmful behavior. And how we talk when we talk with the insurance company was like, like they want to kind of come with the new insurance boxes, right? Things that they come together. Like if you buy this insurance plan and this insurance plans and you combine them, but then again, you want to kind of make sure that you don't really kind of create a random plan that will be against something. So then why we wanted to have these guards, and then whenever you create a new plan, check it against the guards. So it's really your shielding, and then the customers, well, she's not really customers, but to your bosses, you can only present those things that make sense. And I know that there were several questions, and this is what we want to talk about. Previously, when I just started to work in this, I was very much, like my hands were very dirty in that directions because, okay, there's a question, sorry.
Sorry, could you go back one slide?
Of course.
I'll switch on the mic. Your specifications, are these safety specs, like liveness safety specs, or
It depends what is actually what you want to do. Like, for example, one of the questions is, what is dependent? So this is also like, you would assume it's your child, right? Like what else would be dependent? But maybe now comes complicated. What about kidnapped child? I'm not talking about horrible situations, but what if you have divorced parents and then one parent take away child and doesn't want to? Are you still, is this child still your dependent or not? So, like there's so many legal situations that you don't even consider. So, like practically what we thought was be like, take the current spec and derive like only first order logic, like dependent is and so on. And then you can actually say, generate me new plans. And then you want to see that these plans are actually just consistent with the rules that are out there. But if you want to go,
that's model checking, right? That's not shielding per se, or is it?
For me, shield is just something that prevents you from doing something horrible, right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious because, like you said, you have the LLM translate the user intent into the formal language. So is that like, how reliable is that? And have you considered?
This is what I was like. We don't have user intent, right? We have legal code. There is no user intent, right?
Oh, but I thought there was also a user question that you have to formalize.
That is.
So you have the legal code. Maybe I misunderstood.
Yes. So there are two things, right? One of them is like, currently we are translating legal code, and I will kind of bear with me for one more slide, and then you will see. So I wanted to say, like, right when we were starting to translate it, I really was like really deep down into this. We nothing was working, right? We tried K-shot learning. Then we were saying like, okay, that doesn't work. Then maybe we should try, like intermediate language as a representation. And then we actually tried to translate into Python, because why? LLMs were way more translated in Python. To capture non-monotonicity, let's try to translate it into Prolog. We were playing into all these directions. And then the main part I remember is actually quite a fun story. Like, so when we just started, and LLMs were actually could not capture ORs, and it could not capture 10. So we say like 5 or numbers, right? So say like, if we say like, you can have up to 5 coffees, it wouldn't be your number of coffees is less than equal than 5, but it would be literally up to 5, F-I-V, coffees. So you wouldn't really capture out the numbers, but then we were, like young and naive and says like, aha, this is LLM. We are still smarter than one LLM. What we will do, we will kind of go through all the predicates that it creates, pull out ORs, pull out numbers, and life will be good. Then once I'm going through this and I see something like this, for every X, if U of X is less than 10, I'm like, what is U of X? So let me tell you, who can guess what does it mean? If U of X is less than 10. Any suggestion? Okay, before tenure. Because what we were doing was like, if the predicate would have a number, we would pull out the number. So, like I'm telling you, we tried lots of things and it didn't work this much. But then recently, simply for the translation purposes, LLMs became really crazy good. So I actually this is what they say, like, bear with me. I wanted to show this an email that I got, like, so that was like 2-3 days ago. He says like, it's currently, so he was playing with this, and look at what he says. Like, over the weekend, I tried to use it to translate it of the section of the text code that I've been working with. This is the kid who wants to start a startup of, so he wants to use first order logic and translations to some legal things. So he wants to do text stuff, right? Like with no prompting. It's one-shotted a translation at the right altitude that I've been looking for, and just like, okay, I still need to check it manually, but it's way better than it used to be. So that's kind of, in some sense now, I don't really make my hands dirty anymore. I just let students play with this. And whenever, like just ask them. So currently we are still just going with the K-shots, learning all these techniques and tools that we were playing, pushing, praying. That kind of did not work. But then there was one question that I want to show you also now, which was like, how to measure reasoning capabilities of LLMs, right? Because the question is like, will we be able to make them, okay, I'm taking too much. Okay. And because, like you have probably heard, there are these standard benchmarks, and you will see this is like from, just got accepted somewhere. So, like this is from last year measurements. So you will see there are these standard benchmarks, which is actually just benchmarks of the type of, like if Johnny has 2 apples and Mary has 5 apples, together they have 7 apples. Can you conclude that? And maybe a little bit more complicated with this, but not more. And if you look at the modern LLMs at that time, they were all like, wow, very close, over 90. So which means that whatever we do, we cannot really measure reasoning capabilities because they're all really amazing at reasoning. So what we did, and actually that's my students who went out drinking and came up with a really great plan, was the following. Let me kind of show you a simple example. Don't read this because it's kind of has too much time. I have to speed up. So imagine the following. If I tell you, if it's raining and I'm it's raining, I will take umbrella. It's raining. So what you will take? Take umbrella. But imagine if I now tell you, if it's raining and 2 + 3 = 5, I will take umbrella. And you'll say like, okay, this is obvious rubbish that you put, but you will ignore, right? But now what if I tell you, if it's raining and 2 + 3 = 5, and I don't know, 5 + 5 = 10, I will take umbrella. So suddenly you realize like I can, and now instead of saying this, you'll say like, if it's raining and if Alice has 3 apples and Bob has 2 apples, and if Alice and Bob have 5 apples, then combine, and then, like you can continue. You can see that you can actually so easily create benchmarks. Like this was our main job. We wanted to cheaply create benchmarks, because you will just do all this chaining. That's why it's called Scheherazade, because it kind of stands like, like you tell a story and then you immediately continue with another and you immediately continue with another. So you do this chaining. And this was actually, we will see. So I said, like it was last year done, like it's actually after, like, well, I think this was 01, was still holding after 10 chainings, and then it started to go really bad. But some of them, I think green is Claude. No, Claude. Yeah, Claude, after you do 2 chains and it's only like, oh, totally off the rails. And this was, if you think about, all we would do is like super cheap, because more or less we would just kind of say like, here's your problem. And then we will insert tautologies, but this tautology will just be more wordly. And it would, so then we realized like, okay, if you cannot even handle tautologies insertion, we are then, then that was kind of bad. But since I have to finish, I want to show you also another project that we went towards that combines, like I told you now, how legal, you kind of trust me now that formal methods can really, they could really work really well. To kind of show you how well they would, when we talk with this insurance company, they say, we have seen so many AI companies, and they would all tell we will solve all your problems, but we simply didn't trust them because we cannot afford to make mistakes. And we're like, and then you kind of like, oh, but formal methods here are, like save the world. So, like sometimes, like years of teaching, you need to kind of learn how to act, right? Yeah, but so see, what is senior partner? Senior partners is a different things, the things that actually always thought that the legal reasoning is. And I will explain you by how we did that. So we actually took like, it's a real assistant for legal research. And this is what, when it comes to legal reasoning, is what lawyers kind of hate to do, and they have to do. So when it comes to, when you come with a new case to someone, then usually the question is like, and I know this because Scott, my collaborator, so he has a pro bono clinic. And that means that and his clinic is heavily specialized in media law. So which means, let's say you're independent filmmaker who created documentary about someone polluting river. Then these bad guys are suing you because it's violation of their privacy that you film them by how they're polluting river. And then you come to Scott and he will kind of represent you pro bono. But when you come to him and say, hey, this is my case, what you will do first? Well, first you will say, This reminds me on that case that we have, can someone find me a similar case? Because what you need to do, and let me kind of maybe skip immediately. You need to draft something that looks as follows. You need to kind of say, okay, this is the case of this and this. This is what the rules say. This is what was noteworthy exceptions. This is what is, like other things. Like, so you need to do, this is what First Amendment say. So practically you need to create this, which is called, which they call brief. And since I told you that to create this, you need lots of existing material. That's why we were actually in really good position, because as I said, Scott has this legal clinic on filmmaking. So what we did, we first downloaded like pre-trained model, then we trained the model on the standard text, like which is actually like you had the pre-trained model, then we trained on the legal principles, and then we trained on really these existing legal cases and memos. So that's why you will see, I will also compare this to output of ChatGPT-4 at that time. You will never get the such a good answers, because this is the magic things. Like all those things are usually private to legal companies. And that's what they say. What makes a legal company great? It makes it actually the fact that they have really great material to answer, right? And so this is actually now the process which you probably have seen, I see like, oh, there is like, can a deceased person estate bring a suit, plead one of the 4 privacy torts? So like practically it was really just like training model to understand legal reasoning. Question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. But then when you get this, we created this tool called Senior Partner. And maybe again, to show you through example, it's the following, right? You have David, who is New York-based photographer. He goes around, he takes the picture of the children, not like a perv or something, like just kind of takes the picture for the exhibition. Like he wants to show how city life is something like emptiness of the city life, something like this. So he creates exhibition, and the parent says like, hey, you took the picture of our children without our consent, we will sue you. So what do you think? Can they sue him or not? Exactly, because like they could sue him if he had used these pictures for advertisement. But since he just took the pictures to kind of, like that's okay. For exhibition, it's fine. But if you would use it to advertise, that would be wrong. So this is very, but like, how do you know all this? Because, like, again, you want to kind of create all these statutes, cases, memos. And then once you create this, then you will get something else, right? Like something like this. So, like, and this is what when I talk with the lawyers, this is actually what they hate to do, right? Because, like, yes, they like to do lawyering, but there is also lots of this initial work that has to be done. And then I remember when Scott came with this idea, I said like, yeah, you will be the professor of the year. Like all your students will hate you because they will lose job. And then it realized it's not really like this. There is something called utilization rate. And this is that only, like it's kind of will sound strange, but apparently on average, lawyers can actually charge only 20 minutes for every full hours, like how it goes, like it's actually 1/3, right? So it's kind of like you charge for the 1 hour charge, you need to work 3 hours. Even though, and then you see how things were changing, right? Like even with all existing tools, they're still only on 1/3. And this is usually when they're actually kind of, like you have to spend the time. Of course, we were talking like in some very flashy and shiny companies, they will even charge you for breathing into their direction. But like on average, it's actually much worse than you would think. So this is actually what we thought would be a nice and great tool. And then like it creates all this like response, whether you can change, which says why not. What does it say? Invasion of the privacy under New York law. Like what are exceptions? And then we even will say, what are if you want to do opposing arguments, can you provide opposing arguments? This is also what we will create, and that is conclusion. Then we say like, okay, if I want to do exactly the same prompt to ChatGPT, what will happen? So you will see there won't be opposing argument, this will be created and so on. So no real citations and so on. So then there is one thing that you can heard is like, like if you probably heard someone threw things to ChatGPT and they got like some fake answers, right? So we then wanted to make sure that the answers are, all the citations that you use are useful. is should be kind of inserted fake name versus Finkelstein, Bob versus Joe, baking company versus floor. So we just kind of put it manually. But what we do, as soon as you see some case, then you actually, all the cases that we have, we store them into database, we represent them as a vector. So when you actually get some case, you first check whether the case exists, in which case it's green, and not only it's green or orange. If case does not exist, you just kind of put it in the red. But also if it exists and it's not semantically where it should be, then you actually just make it in the orange. So this is what they say, it's combined with the search techniques. So I'm sorry that I went a little bit more than I wanted to go. And the conclusion is, I really believe that, like legal texts and are really complicated. I'm already playing with that tools for a while, and it's really hard to understand. I usually don't even bother to read them because it's complicated. And but I think if you think about how this could be applied, I think it has way more applications that we can even imagine. Because I told you we want to help nonprofits, because for nonprofits, it's again very heavy. They're heavily understaffed, and if you come to them with the problem, if the kid who is working there doesn't know how to answer, you won't get a good advice. So this is actually where we want to go with democratization of legal reasoning. But then I also want to show you having things which are very heavily regulated, where you don't really need someone to explain. Then then the formal methods are the tool that can provide accountability and explainability. And to kind of, again, I'm praising this. I kind of want to go with who recognized the person, Oliver Wendell Holmes. So he said, the life of law has not been logic. It has been experience. But what I want to tell you, the life of law has logic, always has been and always will be. So who will you trust? So let me stop here. Okay.
Yeah, so what we can do, maybe one or two questions. Please.
You probably are familiar with RB.
Yes, yes.
The value that $3 billion.
Yes, I know.
What surprised me is that AOS, which is one of the leading law firms, more than 150 law firm, decided to actually have RB agents. They license it and they give it to clients. I was trying to reconcile their success with all the examples that you showed. Why are they successful? Why are people using it?
We'll answer this when we are not recorded.
We can talk about it.
No. I will answer. I have some instances, but not.
It's great to see the progress of this work over the last 2.5 years. I think
when I
spoke to you and Scott back then. So this is.
I think you were there when we took this photo. Remember?
Probably, yeah. Okay, so but I wanted to talk more about this translation piece of it, right? Mm-hmm. From the legal code text into SMT-lib, and you said that now your student or someone told you that that you can get SMT-lib, what seems like correct SMT-lib
that's what
formulas. Yeah. But I guess there's always going to be this question of whether it is really something that you can trust to be correct, right? So do you do that? Do you have ways of doing sanity checks on the output? I guess that was the problem that you mentioned. How do you test these translations? And how do you gain confidence in that?
So we have various validations techniques, right? When we were still kind of what we were doing back then, we would use a couple of LLMs and then we would check equivalence. Now, all of them might be making errors, right? So, but at least it would kind of help us where we need to do. But if I'm really honest, ultimately is we ask either Scott or a law student Scott for one final verification just to kind of make sure it's correct. But again, this is human, so it might be an error in translation, but we do like various things, like it says like couple of LLMs, check equivalence. What else did we do at that time? This was
But
like,
doing a manual review at scale is not possible, right? I mean, you take the
Yeah.
entire code and you translate that.
yeah, that's why I said
So,
also that we
yeah.
didn't, when we comes to the old Yale handbook, we
Yeah.
took only the part which was about,
Right.
yeah, like, so this is the topic that we somehow, I mean, we're somehow hoping that they will get, the LLMs will get better and better, but how to, we will really ensure that correction, that it's correct translation, that we're still kind of.
And the related question is about vocabulary, right? Because if you invent the same predicates in different portions of the text, and now you like put everything together,
Yeah.
they conflict. So you have to somehow have a way of disambiguating and all of
That's
that.
true, but there is also a very nice thing that, remember when I told you that we were translating into, when we were translating into Python, because then somehow when you would take, it was actually in the classes, so class would actually capture like locality.
Sure.
And, but
yeah.
now,
But I mean, if you could do simple things like prefix the symbol name with the section under which it is, but there could be different sections
no,
where you're talking
yeah.
about the same thing, and so you actually don't
Need
want
to, no,
encapsulation.
those sections
Yeah.
are really heavily interlinked. So
Yeah.
like how translation was going, like when I was still kind of heavily involved in this, it was going like this. You take a text, so then you translate it, we were creating somehow some very large tuple where it would be like, here is the text, here is the translation, here is the label, because we need named for SMT translation, so there is the label, but then there were also references to in which section is used and so on. So it was, translation was really containing this very large text, because then when we have this like tuple, then was actually much easier because when you call your minimal unsatisfiable core, then minimal unsatisfiable core would say like, oh, look, those are those, like 5 things. Then you actually immediately select the text that it is, but also you get the sections too. And yeah, that we are kind of various things. Like, I mean, why I don't like that much, because it's very much engineering, but we don't, we don't have, okay, it kind of really goes like in the counter example, like, you say like, oh, look, we forgot this part. So now but our engineers are really good. So like they're really like excellent. So, like then we say like, okay, now we just need to extend this to it is able to do that. But, like originally we started with this tuple because we knew we will need labels. So that's why maybe that was actually good design initially, to having this tuple. And then now we just kind of extend occasionally if we need to add something.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Would be the last one.
I still then after that need to answer about Harvey. Stay there. Okay, really? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I would like to think that lawyers also use some creativity in trying to formulate their cases or something. What you seem to have presented is that it's just, finding out things and putting them according to some rules. I mean, I could be completely mistaken. I know nothing about the business of law.
But to me, it also sounds this way, honestly. From previously, I assume, you have to be good orator when you present things to the jury, right? Because that is true, right? Like you need to present the case, you need to, and probably when you talk to the jury, they won't understand things like A versus B, or, like Smith versus Finkelstein versus Flower or something, whatever we invented, right? But you need to present case in a understandable way. But when it comes to before, like funny enough is like only very small number of cases come to the jury. Like they go through the, like you bring them to the case, then they go to judge who actually immediately decides whether it can be accepted or dismissed. And to come to that level, you really need to provide your arguments in the strict way. But that's, again, you need to talk with Scott. He will tell you much more about that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.